Up next is Karl-Theodor zu Guttenberg, former German Minister of Economics and Technology, and now chairman and founder of Spitzberg Partners. He is joined on stage by the Atlantic's Steve Clemons.
Thank you, everybody. And Steve, I just want to say, I'm seeing Donald Trump at noon, so I'm going to drop your name and say you really ought to be in contention. yeah. And you will do a column. KT, have a seat.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for So I just learned, I need to make an announcement here. Despite the crafted cocktails at 4 o'clock, we are then going to, for those of you who make it through the day, we'll have fun time with Yanis Varoufakis, who's the former finance minister of Greece, because he chose to take a plane from New York this morning rather than a train. I don't want to judge anyone for that, but that plane is not going to fly. And so he's still on his way down, but that means we get a little bit more time. But you said you've had some fun with Yanis in the past, that you interviewed him.
Well, first of all, the Greek are always a bit late.
Yeah? Are you on Twitter?
Well, it's...
Yeah, no, that's good. But you spent some time
I spent some time with him, I have to say.
So what if, I'm going to be interviewing him, so what if you were me, what would you ask him to put him on edge?
Would he actually say that he ever failed? Because that's the question I asked him, and then it was half an hour about circumventing about the question whether he failed or not. And asking that question someone who can, as I can as well, if I, with a good political background, who can spell self-confidence correctly, is something which is quite funny, actually. You'll enjoy him.
Okay, great.
He's an extremely smart guy.
I know he's extremely smart. He called a lot of your countrymen terrorists in the financial industry.
Oh, we loved him for that.
So earlier today, we had Gerard Lyons, who is a chief economic advisor on Brexit to the mayor of London. And I asked...
Another softie in the political...
Yeah, another softie. Yeah. He was actually very compelling. Wasn't he compelling? I mean, he was... How many of you are now in favor of Brexit? Oh, yeah, there's one here. Well, I guess he wasn't as good as I thought. But I did ask him what he would do if he were the German finance minister and he were in charge of and he said he would resign. So if you were in charge...
case of a Brexit.
Yeah, in case, well, I guess just in general, but he basically lambasted the German finance minister and, the economics of austerity and a lot of this. But you've held some of the most senior positions in German government. One of the most popular politicians in Germany. Now you have freedom from all of that, so I'm expecting something with sizzle here. What do you think, if you were to be on the British side of this, what do you think, as you look at the consequences and opportunities for the UK and Brexit, what are those?
Well, one consequence would be that you have to learn that as the UK, despite all traditional historic reasons to be very skeptical about whatever happens on the continent, that you, in many regards, rely on the continent. We have established trade relations that couldn't be deeper, and these trade relations have prospered by the fact of the single market, have prospered by the fact that we had a couple of partnerships within the European Union that were stronger than any other when it came to the question of, is free trade something we need to foster at the end of the day? And there, for instance, we had an extremely close relationship between Germany and the UK. That relationship would suffer. The relationship towards an entity where the British economy still is tightly connected to, and this is the European Union, as flawed as it is, would be at risk in many regards. And of course, if you take security aspects, if you take wider geopolitical aspects, all of these things have, as flawed as the European Union is, have been dealt with in a way that you needed each other. So I wish them good luck. Doing that all by themselves and trying to renegotiate with Brussels some extra bonuses or other things will be very difficult. And of course, we are in a situation right now where we see the UK on the verge of sliding into that kind of Brexit scenario, although at the very moment I'd say there's still a slight chance that they don't do it.
Because a slight chance they don't.
A slight chance they don't do the Brexit,
right.
Which is this kind of double or triple name, which adds up to a plus.
So that's a pretty pessimistic observation.
It's a pessimistic observation from their point of view. It's an even more pessimistic observation also from the continental point of view, and specifically coming from Germany. Germany has been, for the last few years, quite a strong economic power in the European Union. Of course, we have profited from the malaise of the others, and there were certain things which ignited some points of the European development we are in right now. But Germany needs the partner UK. We are both believers in this kind of free trade scenarios. Both of us formed as countries a blocking minority whenever it came to discussions in Brussels about restrictions of free trade and other things. So the UK is our third largest trade partner globally. So all these things would be extremely difficult to handle. And I'm very much against it, and as funky as the London mayor is, as little enthused I am about his arguments.
You and I were talking recently about the whole idea of the European Union and being very close to just coming crashing down. What do you see?
I've never been as worried as I am right now. I think I'd go even further. I think we are on the verge of collapse. And of course, this is a process, and we have lived in Europe with the European idea by embracing the idea of a process. And I learned this wonderful American phrase of kicking the can down the road. This is something you learn when you live over here for now 5 years, which is probably a very proper description of
American soccer.
which is fabulous. And which probably somehow properly describes the way we form next steps in the European Union. I even went further. I said it's more kicking the can up the road and keeps falling down to our feet, and we would still call it a progress. And so that's one thing. The second thing is the European Union was built on the idea of no conflicts, no wars any longer on the European continent, including, of course, the UK. In that respect, Europe has been a success story for the last couple of decades, and it would be utterly ridiculous to put that at risk. Having said that, the first European construct of the European of the 6th and of the 9th, of the 12th, of the 5th, and all the way up to the 28 right now, was always tied to the idea of a Europe of equals. So we have to ask ourselves critically, is that maybe a founding myth or even a founding lie which never turned out to be true? Europe never was a Europe of equals. It was always a Europe of different speeds. It was always a Europe of concentric circles. It was always a Europe with very different interests and other things. And we formed treatises that actually tried to strengthen that wonderful idea, but that kind of illusion. So, and when it comes to very, very emotional topics, this whole thing crumbles. And now we are overwhelmed by emotional topics. Refugee crisis, Euro crisis, Greece, we'll talk about that later. The different speeds we have in Southern Europe and in parts of Northern Europe. It's the idea of the Europe. All this is already existing concentric circles. So if you don't tackle that, and if we have at the same time, and that's the most important point now, the undermining of the second great idea, which is solidarity, then the project is at great risk. We have probably the most developed desolidarization we have ever faced in Europe. And this is not only a fact that some players don't like the way Germany acts. Germany has had its role as well in the last couple of months actually to foster desolidarization.
What has Germany gotten most wrong over the last few years in play? Martin Wolf has said Germany has not realized its hegemonic responsibilities in Europe, that it just, and then, you know, when you, to be quite blunt, if you look at, not just in the last few months, but over a lot of period of time, there's a kind of arrogance that Germany has had with regard to its partners in Europe, that they're not quite German, that they're not fiscally responsible, that they don't work as hard, that they don't keep their accounts in gear. And so I'm just interested in whether you think that's been a mistake, or is that just the way it is?
It is an outcome of a certain development. There is no German politician who actually ever wanted a German Europe, a German European Union. This is due to our own terrible history of the last century. Nobody would actually ever dare to do that. And to impose the German whatever grand idea to other European partners. Nevertheless, we have been perceived that way when we try to negotiate solutions for the euro crisis, and when we had this discussion about austerity and all the other things, and when everyone had got the feeling, well, it's a quite interesting German way to impose pressure by not being too active, by not embracing the smaller partners as well and other things, which was a long-term German tradition. Helmut Kohl, for instance, the chancellor, always took care as much about the small European member states, Luxembourg, the Baltic states and others, as he did towards France and the UK and other places. Second thing, I think when we talk about the question, what have we done wrong from a German perspective, it's an argument which comes from the other side. At the peak of the euro crisis and of the financial crisis, everyone looked at Germany. Everyone looked at the chancellor. Everyone saw her as the last remaining strong figure, strong leader in Europe. You had the greatest cover stories over here in the US as well about her, the European leader. At that very moment, we had a chance to push the idea of new treaties for Europe actually forward, to deal with these concentric circles, to deal with that idea of a Europe that is actually in reality different to the core original idea. And that didn't happen. I think that's a missed chance.
Are you still pals with Angela?
Despite what I've said right now?
Yeah, we just
No, I see her quite regularly. It's I admire a lot of things. I admire that she is willing to accept criticism even of such a young fool as I am, and she would always listen, and that's something many people don't know about her. And she even has a certain amount of humor, which other people wouldn't even expect as well. So, having said all that, she's a person who has probably developed a very new kind of leadership in Europe, which is very different to the perception you have of her from over here. And I once called it, and that's not disrespectful, I think it has a lot of elements one could learn from at a certain point. I once called it the art of being Merkel-Javelli. And Merkel-Javellism, what a word, even for a German, we love these long words.
Merkel-Javellism.
But Merkel-Javellism
Works for me.
Works for you, doesn't it? Yeah, for good journalists it works actually.
Yeah.
Everything that's connected with Machiavelli works for you guys. But it's... But what are the principles of being Merkel-Javelli? One is, and if you look at the euro crisis and at the financial crisis, you will see many elements. First principle is to keep all options open, but to do it decisively. Very important. It's something which played out very well for her for more than 10 years, and at the moment she didn't do that any longer. She faced the biggest difficulties imaginable looking at her decision regarding the refugee crisis. There was a second decision which was somehow similar as well when we decided to abolish nuclear power in Germany, our energy transition after Fukushima, when we actually probably feared a tsunami in the Baltic Sea. I don't know why that actually happened. Second principle is to hesitate vigorously. This is an element of power, because if you leave the impression amongst European and other partners that they have to come up to you and actually give you argument after argument of what the fundament for a decision could be, then you have enough time also to test the moods and the emotions amongst your own electors, but also amongst your partners in the European Union. And then at the end of the day, it's about the question, what's worse, being rolled over by German money or being not rolled over by German money? So hesitating can work. Third principle, and that's something you see all around the globe, but it very rarely works out properly, is to keep things as complex or complicated as anyhow possible, and to build up a facade of complexity, and then you can make your 170-degree turns behind the facade of complexity without any journalists or any other politician or any other noticing it. It has to be 170 degrees, because if it's 180 degrees, you would land on the same spot. If you do it a second time, it's too obvious. And that only works if you really get every single element and every single part of the complexity. And there, Angela Merkel is absolutely brilliant. I've never seen someone who has the ability of analyzing extremely difficult interrelations as properly as she does. But that's helpful if you have to, if you have to change your opinion once in a while, and that happens in politics, as we know. Fourth and last principle, and that has a lot to do, again, with the situation we're in Europe right now. Install people at the top of multinational and European institutions that are as well known as a Norwegian lacrosse player. They have to be professional in many respects, of course, and most of them are very knowledgeable. But don't have players who
No celebrities.
No celebrities. Don't have someone who could actually ruin the fact that it is, at the end of the day, the member state and the stronger member state that decide upon the question who will, on paper, lead Europe, but de facto you will still lead Europe, and you can shine even brighter than the other guy on top of a European institution. So much about being Machiavelli. It's an interesting style of leadership. Did it help Europe so far?
A great article. I don't know if you'd have a future over there afterward, but it's a great article. It's a great article. Let me ask you, let's transport ourselves, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ahead. We had dinner the other night, and we were talking about Turkey, and you got, changes happening in Eastern Europe. You have a wave of right-wing nativist parties in Europe, and arguably perhaps in the United States. You have, you're predicting essentially real potential of European collapse. China slowing down, Russia's carving up pieces of the world that it wants. A lot of us are just saying, we're trying to preserve the institutions that we've had. How do you see the future? Is that the smart choice? Or do we need to go back to the drawing board and think about power and a new global social contract? I mean, how do you get the future right, given all the negative things you see coming at you? You've been in defense minister, economic minister. So 10 years from now, what do you see coming?
First of all, we might still be kicking the can down the road. But in a way, much weaker situation. So coming from there, I guess the idea of the European Union is one we need to preserve, and is one we need to redefine as well, by analyzing its weaknesses properly, by analyzing its realities properly.
So a paler version of the European Union, a weaker version of the European Union?
Probably a more flexible version of the European Union could be a stronger version at the end of the day. Of course, it bears a lot of risks, because those which you are not embracing...
So sort of an easy come, easy go European Union,
well, there
leave?
never ever is an easy or easy there. It's, that's not going to happen. But I think we have to, as I've said before, we have to adapt the structures to the realities, and there's a way to do that. And there have been ideas already in the 1990s and other things, but we have never had the necessary discussion as well with the wider European public of what this core idea, what the narrative could be. So we've never had, I've used this example before, we've never had a debate in Europe as you have had it over here in the US with the Federalist Papers in the 18th century. Never took place, never something like that. So it's probably even the malaise we are in, all the crises we are facing is also a chance, an opportunity to actually come to senses and to form something. Second element, which is important, let's not risk our transatlantic partnership. And let's also not only talk about shared values here, because this is always somehow tied to a certain amount of romanticism, of nostalgia and other things. We have to go further, and we also have to redefine this partnership as well, but it is its core in that very regard. And yes, we are surrounded by risk factors, and rather significant risk factors, more and more symmetric risk factors. One of the symmetric ones is probably the behavior of Russia right now. For Europe, it is of highest interest to have a peaceful relationship with Russia, and to have a relationship with Russia which doesn't throw us into the next element of crisis and other things. And this is where we very often differ with our American partners of how to actually achieve that, which is difficult with someone who is more or less testosterone-driven, sitting in the Kremlin and trying to surprise us every day. But he's one of the few proactive leaders at the very moment, although I don't like any single element of what he's doing. Turkey, still 5 years ago, many dreamt of a Turkey as part of the European Union. I think they're moving further and further away from the European Union. Now they're talking about constitutional changes. They're talking about a presidential system. It is more and more autocratic, and at the same time, we have maneuvered ourselves in a situation that we can be blackmailed by Turkey talking about the refugee crisis. Do we need Europe, or do we need a fragmented, desolidarized Europe? We need Europe, otherwise we cannot handle all these ideas. What do we face right now? Renationalization, a party landscape which is as colorful as your socks, if I may say so.
I thought you would bring more of a socks game. Yeah.
Or try to be
Yeah.
somehow neutral, which bears a lot of elements in the European Union that feed populism that are quite similar to what you face over here right now.
Right,
Many of
right.
the arguments are very analogous. It's and that's worrisome, but at the same time, a chance for creating a new form of leadership and new structures in Europe.
I want to go to the audience in just a minute, but just a quick answer on this. One of our speakers this afternoon, we're having a session on trade deficits, Lori Wallach, was just in Germany and part of the protests against TTIP and trade. And I began looking at German public attitudes about trade, and it's unbelievable. The support for trade is lower in Germany than among Americans now voting. And how can that be? I mean, what's going on in your country?
It has a lot to do with the way the whole thing was communicated. Mm-hmm. It has a lot to do with a development I don't like in Europe right now, and specifically in Germany, with growing anti-Americanism. It's, by the way, a question we have to ask ourselves over here as well. Did we do it, or did you do everything right actually to reestablish this relationship? So there are many reflexes, and then from a political point of view, we did a lot of things dramatically wrong as we kept the whole discussion about TTIP as intransparent as anyhow possible. So that leads to a situation where you discuss with the big industry players in Europe, with the Siemenses, with the DAX companies and all the other things. But the small and medium-sized entities in Germany, which are the backbone of our economy, they felt left out. And so they became more and more skeptical. They didn't get the answers. They are the ones that are influencing local papers, that are influencing the Rotary Club around the corner, that are influenced. So this is how a certain opinion gets its traction, or finds its traction. And I'm rather pessimistic whether we will see the fantastic idea of TTIP prevail at the end of the day. Of course, at some point, our leaders will stand up and say, oh, we have succeeded, fantastic, we have a TTIP here, but it probably will be a skeleton of the original idea.
Fascinating. Let me go to the audience. We just have a couple of minutes. Yeah, right here right over here.
Hi there. My name is Stephen Yin, and excuse me, and I go to Georgetown University. And my question centers on trade agreement. Recently, the U.S. and 11 other countries signed TPP in New Zealand, and to my understanding, Canada and the EU already have CETA. And as recently as, I believe, Sunday, President Obama tried to get support for TTIP in Hanover. So going back to the original topic of Brexit, if Brexit does happen, how do you think this would affect TTIP negotiations? Thank you.
Thank you. It would dramatically affect TTIP negotiations because, as I've said before, the idea of having strong proponents within the European Union for free trade was always tied to strong relationship in that regard between Germany and the UK and some other players, of course, in the European Union. You have mentioned CETA with Canada. We are not there yet. We are further. We have achieved more with Canada than with the US in that very respect, and I see it as a very positive development that the outgoing president, Obama, has put it on top of his agenda, at least in his relations with Europe, to achieve something here. And that he used his visit to Hanover and to Europe to get back to that idea. However, I think it will be extremely hard to come to a conclusion during this year, and in between we will have the decision about the Brexit. So if the Brexit comes, I think this will be a major blow for the idea of TTIP. If it doesn't come, it is still very difficult because we are now in a discussion others will have as well. So if the Brexit doesn't come, we'll probably have again discussions about what could we do to keep the Brits as stable as we can in the boat and not to provoke another debate and another discussion about further referendum and so on and so on. So the current environment is not the healthiest one for a quick decision on a substantial TTIP.
KT, just as we finish up, I see Mark Zandi and Maya McGinnis, and they're amazing, and we should all we should invite them all up here and continue discussion, but I don't think we can do that. But to wrap up, if you were German Chancellor, just think about for a minute. And,
no chance.
Many people don't. But if you were German Chancellor and you were meeting...
Not after my remarks.
Yeah, and you were meeting President Donald Trump, what would you want to put on the table? Trump is in town. He's speaking a couple of blocks away. What do you think, either a question or the most important thing you would like a President Donald Trump to know about that you think he may not? Short form.
First of all, you are asking for two preconditions that I very much hope will never happen. Secondly, I won't ask him a question because I probably will get only an answer that will not relate to the question but to the person I ask. And thirdly, I would strengthen his feelings that it's worthwhile listening to others and act the way they tell you.
We will end there. Ladies and gentlemen, KT Guttenberg, thank you so much for joining us.
Very much.